I'm Mish Pillett. I'm the affiliate representative for the Tucson Cactus and Succulent Society, the largest local affiliate in the world. And we are very happy to be sponsoring Jeremy here for his lecture. So short bio, Kelly told me to keep it short. So Jeremy started his plant career at the San Diego Botanical Garden, where a few of his original gardens are still on display. After several years of working at the gardens, he moved on to start his landscape contracting business, Spath. Additionally, he worked as a curator for Rancho Soledad Nursery in Rancho Santa Fe. Jeremy continues working in landscape design and build, and has also begun his own nursery and tissue culture lab, Hidden Agave, in North San Diego County. When he's not designing and installing gardens, he's hybridizing and creating new plants, as well as traveling around the world to research the plants he loves. And as he believes, nature is the best landscaper. So please welcome Jeremy.
Thank you. Is this on? All right, thank you, Mish, and it's great to be here. I'm sure that most of you out there have no idea who I am, so I would like to do a slightly more in-depth, terse background of myself and how I got here today. Some of you may have heard part of it before, so just bear with me, but I did work for San Diego Botanic Garden, and I remember as a young boy absolutely hating botanic gardens. I felt like, you know, and I dragged my own kids to botanic gardens too, but I felt like my mother was just bringing me to like the zoo without animals. You know, I found it very boring. But if you fast forward, you know, I was in my early 30s and I was living in this little studio apartment. And I've told this story before, but it's how I got into plants. I was living in this little studio apartment in Lucadia, and it had this bare strip of dirt out in front of it that was very boring, or very depressing to me, I should say. And I came home from work, and it was my birthday at the time, and it's a bit of an anniversary because actually my birthday was yesterday. I just realized that. Yeah. Thank you. But my girlfriend at the time had planted it out with all these soft succulents, and I was just mesmerized by the colors and the forms and the shapes, and I fell deep into the rabbit hole. And she would begin to accuse me of loving the plants more than her, and I'll just leave it at that. She was a very great girl. She was great. But anyway, I left. I had gone to college and was using my degree at a job and left it to start working for the Botanic Garden. I loved all plants. I still do to this day. And I was on a buying trip once with Julian Duvall, who is here today and who was running the gardens while I was there, and Dave Erlinger, and we went to Rancho Soledad Nursery, and I met Kelly Griffin for the first time. And he toured us around and showed us plants that just absolutely floored me. You know, I mean, species of plants that I was aware of, but I didn't realize that they could become this. I didn't realize, like, you could take certain types of plants and really high grade them to this level. And I remember at the end of that tour, I said to Kelly, you know, if you're ever going on a trip, I'd love to go. And about 2 weeks later, he called me up and said, well, I'm going to Oaxaca, and I need somebody to come with me, and we have about 12 days to drive down there and back. And it was an utterly grueling trip. We used every moment of daylight, running up and down mountains and thorn scrub in high heat. And at the end of the trip, I was exhausted, felt like I needed a vacation, and also felt like it was the best trip of my life. And so I've been doing that ever since. And left the garden, started working for Rancho Soledad, and started a landscape business as well. And I remember I was at Rancho Soledad one day, and you know, the genetics were there. There were plants that had been there for years and years and years. And one day, all these agaves started flowering, and I just thought, well, this is a great opportunity to start crossing agaves, because not much work has been done with agaves because they take so long to flower, you know? And it was just this massive pollen opportunity, and I just started crossing them, and my soul rests with habitat and species, and I was slow to warm to hybrids, but I have really I've really found it difficult to resist what, again, is possible when you bring these plants together. And, you know, I have plants in my collection that, you know, I've crossed, and it's going to be 10 years at least before they flower. And I did it hoping to cross it back to this other plant because there were other traits I wanted to get that were recessive, you know. And it's going to be, when that happens, it's going to be another like 10 years before that plant flowers. And by that time, I'm going to be in my 70s. And so, you know, but that's, what's that? Well, the point is, I mean, it's, the point is that it's sort of the beauty of us, you know, of these kinds of groups and these kinds of people is to be able to stand on each other's shoulders and make the plants we love even more than what they are. And so I now, as Mish had mentioned, have a nursery in Escondido where I do mostly species agaves and new hybrids, tissue culture plants, and really this talk is going to be from when I got into agaves to where I'm standing today, basically. And it's a rough sojourn of north to south. I'm fascinated by the distribution of plants. Why do some grow on this mountain over here and some on this mountain over there, but not over here? And it's just a selection of agaves. Many of them you guys probably know, traveling through the Americas and where they are. So I will begin. Okay. So starting. Oh, no. Okay. Starting in the far north here, in the Mojave Desert, Agave utahlensis Iborispina. It is the furthest north growing agave, and it occurs in California and Nevada. And it comes and it grows in several different areas, but each different location is slightly different than the last. And one of the wonderful things about it is all the different shapes and forms that it can take. Now, its close relative, which it often can be confused with if you're not familiar with it, which also grows in California and Nevada, is Agave utahlensis nevadensis. The main difference being the Iborispina, which means ivory spine, has long white terminal spines. Nevadensis is typically blue, but not always. And both of these plants have, sorry about that, have been the subject of a lot of poaching in recent years. You know, as we all know, succulents have become much more valuable in the last, say, 10, 12 years. And anytime you put a price on something, it can bring out the worst in humans. And not only are they valuable, but I think with the addition of social media and the ability to immediately brag about these things, it has put a lot of these plants in danger. And the problem with digging a true desert plant like utahlensis is once it's dug, it sort of begins a slow death. It's a true desert plant. It doesn't want to be transplanted into a pot and grown under grow lights in somebody's closet on the other side of the world. Also in California is Agave deserti. It doesn't only grow in California, and Agave deserti is often overlooked. It has a very beautiful color, but as my friend Nick Deinhardt likes to say, when you find a really beautiful deserti, it doesn't look anything like an Agave deserti. Agave shy as well in coastal California, as well into Baja California. Now this plant used to be more prolific in San Diego County. I have never been able to figure out its full distribution prior to, you know, a lot of the land development that's gone on in this county. But there is still one population that still exists on naval land down in Point Loma. It's fenced off. This is that population, and it's typically growing right on the coast. This is in Point Loma. And luckily, I got permission to go on to see these plants. They don't let you on. You have to fill out heaps of forms and convince them that you're not a terrorist and you just want to take pictures of plants. And these are them. But once you cross the border into Baja California, there is Agave shy by the millions. And Again, if you look at enough of them, you can find plants that have just all sorts of exceptional shapes and beauty about them. This particular clone was found by Kevin Kreutzer and Kelly Griffin a couple of years ago, but it grows in an area where a great many of the agave shawis get that sort of merged spine look. And that's, again, like what I like to say is just looking for those genetics that you don't see otherwise. This is Braden de Jong. I went down with him and Tony Kroc to go look at agave shawis for a day one time. And Braden he was convinced he was going to find a variegated agave. And as many of us know who have ever gone to look at plants out in the wild, it's rare to find a variegate. And I can tell you that within 1 hour, he found 4 beautifully variegated agave shawi. All of us think there must have been something in those brownies he was eating on the way down. This is Nick Basinski's garden in Mission Hills with agave shawi growing in it. You know, native plants are often overlooked. A lot of people will look at a native plant and it doesn't excite them, but when you group them all together in a garden setting, they just work naturally well together. And there's agave shawi in San Diego County. Now, inland a little bit in Baja, getting a little further down, is avellanidens, which can look very much like a shawi, and shawi subspecies Goldmaniana, which is typically a larger plant growing inland in Baja, California. There are other subtle differences, but that's the quick and easy. Now, agave Goldmaniana, I have seen do this sort of squiggly leaf more than any other plant. There are areas in Baja California where it's common to see this sort of wild look. And I've never seen it replicated in cultivation. I think it must have something to do with environment, and exactly what that is, I'm not sure, so I'm not going to guess. Jumping off the coast of central Baja California is agave Sebastiana on Cedros Island. It also grows on 2 other smaller islands nearby on Isla Natividad and Isla San Benito. It's essentially a blue shawi, but beautiful plant. And here's one in Robert de Jong's garden in Vista, California. Beautiful plant, beautiful colors. This is Isla Natividad, which I had just mentioned a second ago on the left. It's generally a smaller looking Sebastiana, and Vizcainoensis, which is nearby on the mainland Baja California. All very similar looking plants heading down the coast. This is Sebastiana from Isla Natividad in my garden, resembling a bit of an ismensis. Okay, further south in Baja California, off Magdalena Bay on 2 islands, is agave Margarite. It grows on 2 islands outside this island, or outside this bay. And on the southerly island, Isla Margarite, they are generally bluer plants. And on the north, that's Magdalena Bay in the upper left there. They are greener plants. So perhaps we have a new species in our future. All right, jumping back up the Sea of Cortez a little bit is agave subsimplex. It grows on a very, very small island in the middle of the Sea of Cortez in the north. At least that's where the type locality is, but it does also occur on the mainland of Sonora. And many of these islands are still inhabited greatly by the Seri people, like this woman in the bottom right, and you typically will need permission to go onto the islands from them. Heading easterly in Sonora, and on a very, very visible day, you can actually see the Sea of Cortez in the distance looking west, is agave Polona, which Polona, translating to bald, refers to the lack of marginal teeth on the leaves, as you can see. But just a stunning, stunning plant that can be difficult to go see as it occurs on a big game reserve that is completely fenced off, and you need permission to get onto it. All right, this is Agave perrii, which has a very large distribution from southwestern US down to central Mexico. That is Kelly up in the upper right corner on the first trip I ever took with him. These pictures were taken in Chihuahua. Heading further west is Agave bovicornuta, which is very popular in the trade and occurs all the way from Chihuahua and Sonora down into Durango. And now getting into the northeast of Mexico is Agave parasana. Now, I put up these photos on the left of Lophophora and Eriocarpus just to point out that so many times, you go on a trip to go see certain plants in the wild, and you have a list of what you'd like to see, but it is far greater the amount of plants you actually see when traveling just to see a few of them. Really just unexpected beauties like this. And Agave parasana doesn't always look quite this nice. It's a beautiful plant, don't get me wrong, but if you go around and you look at enough of them, you can just find this sort of thing that, I grow a lot of plants from seed, and I like to select the best clones. And, it's a bit like, if you've ever seen a photo of like a supermodel, like this beautiful human, and they're standing with their family, and you look at their family and you go, well, that's a good looking family, and then you look back at the supermodel and you go, I can see why they selected this one to be the model, and it's the same thing with plants. In cultivation is Parasana globe in the upper left, and in the upper right here, Parasana fireball, which was all the rage for its variegation about 12 years ago or so. But the more people that grow these things, and the more sort of beautiful plants we get from it. So if you look at these bottom two photos, are variegated versions of the Parasana globe. In Durango on the left is Agave Petilla, on the right is Agave Nicholsiae. Now there's only two agaves on the CITES list, and one is Victoria Reginae, and one is Parviflora. Now, Victoria Reginae has a bit of a resemblance to these plants right here, and if you have ever gone to see it in the wild, it grows in a great many different populations throughout the northeastern area of Mexico. And it should not be a CITES plant. Whoever put it on CITES was really not one of us. And one that probably should be on CITES is Nicholsiae, as really, true Nicholsiae only really grows in one small area in Coahuila, and it's encroached upon by agriculture and animals that like to eat this kind of stuff. So that is a very special plant and has a very, very small distribution. So that is Agave Pentilla right here. That I should say was, I believe it's flowered now, in Julia Etter's garden outside of Guadalajara. And like I was talking about, here's Victoria Reginae. And this is in Huasteca Canyon. It grows in many different areas, and they're often, flower around this size. They can get pretty big. And Huasteca Canyon is really just one of the most beautiful places to go visit, and there's at least 7 different species of agave that grow there. In Durango is the smaller, more compact version called Swobode that tends to offset prolifically. And there's really no, I can't think of cultivars that are from Victoria Reginae. Bottom right is white rhino, but other than that, there's endless beautiful forms of it, but no other cultivars that I'm aware of. So this is still in Huasteca Canyon in the far northeast Mexico, and that's Agave albopilosa that was recently discovered. Well, it's really not recent anymore. It's been about 30 years, in the mid-90s, but it is the only agave that forms these tufts of hairs on the tips of the spines. And this is the one that, and it's thought that it has those because it collects moisture from fog that it can then drip down to its root system. But this is one I have done in hybrids, and what I was referring to in the beginning when I said I'm going to be probably 70 before I can get what I'm trying to get, because it's a recessive trait. But it's a very, very beautiful trait. This is one that flowered in my garden. If anybody has grown this plant, you know that it is glacially slow to grow. If you put it in the ground, it'll grow at least twice as fast. And it has this gorgeous wine red flower that hangs down like this, as if it were still hanging on a cliff. Still in northeastern Mexico is Agave ovatifolia, another very, very popular one that was somewhat recently described, although it's been known about for at least 100 years. And in the upper right is a man named Nacho. This plant has become much harder to go see because it exists on a ranch land that borders another ranch that you have to cross to get into it. And you need permission from the first ranch to get to the second ranch. However, these two ranches don't get along at all. So it's become, it's become challenging. But if you know this man in the upper right, his name is Nacho. And he's a bit of a Don Juan of the town, and everybody gets along with him. So it gets a little easier to get on. And he would love to lay back on a rock like this and pretend he was talking on the phone and ask you to take his picture so that he could send it around to different girls he knew, I suppose. Wonderful man. So in cultivation, there's more than these that are cultivars. This is Vanzy on the right. I actually have some variegated forms of these out on the tables. And then Orca, which was a Rancho introduction brought by Kelly and distributed from their tissue culture lab. Beautiful plant. And this is the variegated Vanzy that I have out there, which is it's a wonderful plant. As you can see, these Vanzys get these nice channeling on the leaves like that. It just adds a lot of character to it. Northeast to somewhat central Mexico, Agave Montana grows from Nuevo Leon all the way down to Querétaro in different areas in the same mountain range. Beautiful plant, very strong plant, does not offset. There's Kelly again on the right. And off into the northwest, getting closer to central Mexico, is Agave Impresa. Now, Impresa grows in at least 4 different locations, and they're not all equal. Some of them are average-looking plants at locations, some are nice plants, and some are absolutely exceptional plants, like this one right here. Just really, really lovely bud impressions, or tattooing of the leaves. And again, this is another one that was in Julie's garden, but has most likely flowered by now. I believe it was on the cover of the journal too at once, that one. Now, for me, I hope I don't offend anybody when I say Central Mexico is a bit of a dead zone for me for agaves. There are some nice ones, but Xylonicantha is a nice plant. Striata rubra is pretty. It turns these pink colors. It really stands out in the landscape. It's not always this color, and when it turns that color, I think it's most likely having to do with either when it's going to flower or stress. I'm not 100% sure, but very pretty. And Shadigara here on the left, which is a pretty plant, not typically that color, but that's stress colors. But I saw these just recently when I was down in Guanajuato going to see beautiful cactus. I'm sure many of you know Mammillaria Perez de la Rosa andersoniana. And all right, and on the Zacatecas-Durango border, getting into central Mexico, is almost the southernmost population of Agave perii, and it's truncata, which most people are familiar with, especially in Southern California gardens, one of the most popular agaves. The Huntington form came from here. Howard Gentry, who wrote a seminal work on agaves, collected a plant from this location and brought it up here. It got propagated tremendously, and now it's at most nurseries and Home Depots. But a beautiful plant and variable, even in habitat. We only know the really in cultivation, we really only know one form of this plant, but there are other truncate forms there that are quite beautiful. The bottom right is the Huntington form. Now that was one that was getting ready to flower, and a really nice, an extra nice form of it. And bottom left is two flowering in Ramona. And upper right is a seed-grown one. So it's nice to see variability on that variety. Outside of Jalisco is Agave guadalajarana, which is often confused with Agave potatorum, but it's a more handsome plant in general. One way to tell the difference is the backside of the leaves of guadalajarana are sort of have a sandpapery feel to the touch, whereas the potatorum will be a smoother feel. But really, really nice plants. And that's Guadalajara Leon, which is another Rancho introduction. I think probably a selection from Kelly from when he was there. South of Mexico City is Agave horrida, and it grows on lava rock around 8,000 feet, a very high elevation plant, is variable. And when I worked at Rancho, we had thousands of them out on the mesa that nobody would ever buy. And they sat there and they sat there and they sat there. And suddenly the market, primarily from Asia, got very hot on horrida, and we couldn't grow it fast enough. Really nice spines, really nice shape, non-offsetting. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of variability. These are both very, very different forms of horrida. Seed grown. So I was just talking about potatorum, and potatorum many of you may be familiar with. It's another one that's been in cultivation for a while. It grows in many areas throughout Puebla and Oaxaca, and is described as being a non-offsetting species, but plants don't read books. And if you go to enough populations, there is one that, like this one, if you look at the bottom row, second from the left, is one that had, from a population in Puebla, where they offset quite prolifically. Beautiful plants. And two in cultivation. One is Snowfall, variegated form, and Spawn, which is, you know, pretty much about as nice as a potatorum can be. Okay, in Oaxaca still, this is Rancho Tambor. That's in the upper right. That large rock formation is the tambor, which it translates from Spanish to drum. Gorgeous plant. It's been a contentious issue for years, this plant, as it's been split into Oteroai. I'm not going to step into that today, but at the bottom right, it would be a green one occurring at Rancho Tambor. And typically the green ones are what are considered to be Oteroai now. So lots of different forms and shapes of a really beautiful species. The ones on the top are all seed-grown ones. The bottom ones, I'm going to call out Kelly again. I think all three of these came from him. Black and blue, white ice, and lion's mane. And here is Oteroai. Now these two used to be the same species, and they essentially still are by flower. But, and these pictures right here are during the dry season. So these plants are very, very, you know, agaves will be open more when they're getting enough irrigation, and they kind of close up when they're thirsty. And, you know, I mean, that's one of the things that I do love about these plants, is that, you know, it's not just it's not just a rosette that we go, oh, that's a pretty plant that I want to put in my garden, but it's a practical design that works as a function to collect water and to defend its water. And it does it in a really beautiful way. Here it is. So Oteroi is often considered as well to be more of a compact plant like that, although there's variations within both tight note and Oteroi on that. And here's a couple that are in cultivation. Snaggletooth, bottom right, was all the rage recently until tissue culture flooded the market with them. Now they're quite easy to get. Also in Oaxaca, in several different locations, you can find macrocantha. It's one of the sharpest of all agaves. It can offset to insane levels, but it is also a very beautiful plant that can have these gorgeous black terminal spines. I remember when I was working at the Botanic Garden, and we used to get these guys who would come help us, and it was usually people who got in trouble with the law somehow, and they had to do community service and had to do what I did for work, you know. But we were digging out an agave once that had died in the Baja. It was in one of the desert gardens, and this kid who was totally unfamiliar with these plants put his shovel in underneath the agave, and he pushes down the handle of the shovel as hard as he can. And behind him was a macrocantha, and I kid you not, he stood there as the entire spine went through his finger. It's a very unforgiving spine, but if you're aware of it and you still think it's a beautiful plant, it is worth growing. Many different forms. The only cultivar I'm aware of is top middle, Little Penguins. I'm not sure how it got that name. Yeah, Rancho name. And here is Atravirens. Still in Oaxaca. Oaxaca is a plethora of agaves. Upper right is what's considered typical Atravirens, growing in undergrowth underneath pines close to 10,000 feet, way up in the mountains. Along the Puebla-Oaxaca border, these ones I photographed that are considered the mirabilis form, that are all blue. Although, you know, in these top right populations, you can find blue plants as well, and they're typically the ones that are exposed to the sun. But a gorgeous agave that can resemble Americana, but it's a little more handsome, it's a little more bigger, and it does not offset, which is really one of the downsides of the very, very common agave Americana. I put in Cavendivi just because, well, for a couple reasons, I suppose, but this plant resembles several other agaves like Cremnophylla and Dazzlerioides, but you know, you go to these areas where they grow, and it's like I was saying before, you don't just find the plant you're looking for, you see many other plants, and you just see these naturally beautiful areas that people just don't go to. And like that, this is Tony Croc, bottom right, with his wonderful waterfall. Really, and there was this bridge across where you could walk, this rickety old wooden bridge that you could walk across to get a better look at the waterfall. Thank God it was closed that day because I'm not crazy about heights. But really, really gorgeous area in higher elevation Oaxaca. And like I said, all sorts of wildflowers around these areas. Orchids, dahlias, zinnias, salvias, all sorts of gorgeous stuff. Here's Giangola. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this plant as well. It's common in cultivation where it often offsets prolifically. The ones in the wild do not tend to offset. In the upper right is the church in downtown, one of the churches in downtown Oaxaca City, Santo Domingo, and they landscaped it with Giangolas, hectias, and agave oterois. It was really quite nicely done. And in cultivation, we have Moto Sierra on the right, and Giangola Creme Brulee on the top. But as you can see in the bottom left, the plant can get quite large in cultivation. It's much larger than it does in the wild, although that's not too unusual because, you know, you consider the amount of fertilizer and water we can give these plants versus what they're getting in habitat. This is a newer, you know, it wasn't that long ago that somebody said to me, there's nothing new in Oaxaca. And I know this guy who goes around to the mountains of southern Mexico looking for new flavors of mezcal. And he had a photo of one of these mezcals with this gypsicola in the background. And I just asked him what it was, you know, and he didn't know. So, but he did put me in contact with some locals and where to go see it. And we went down to go see it. And I, you know, by the absolute millions across the cliff sides of this area of Oaxaca was this brand new species of agave under the nose of everybody that the locals had been living next to for, you know, possibly thousands of years. But new to science. It's a beautiful plant, has a beautiful color, does not offset, and extremely uncommon in cultivation. Getting further south now into, Oaxaca and Chiapas, this one on the bottom left is the Chiapas type locality, upper right being an inland form of Agaves mensis, and bottom right, a coastal form. It's a gorgeous plant, it stays small, it tends to offset. It's very similar to Potatorum, which I was talking about a little bit ago. The main difference being the size of the plant and its tendency to offset. And once again, a Rancho from Kelly Initiate in the upper right, a coastal form of Agaves mensis, and then the Quichiocan, which is a mensis form, likely from the Chiapas type locality here on the left. Into Chiapas is Agave pygmaea, which is an interesting plant. I believe it's now either a subspecies or variety of C. maniana, which is a larger Potatorum form, but pygmaea is a small plant that grows on limestone road cuts in Chiapas in only really one main area. And in cultivation is dragon toes, which has been very common and very popular, and yet again, Rancho. Crossing the border from Chiapas into Guatemala was something we considered on a trip that we hadn't considered prior going on the trip. And we all thought, well, you know, do you need a visa? Do you need to, who do you need to contact? Like, how easy is it to cross? And I will tell you, this is the most porous border in the world. If you go into an office and talk to the people, the customs, they tell you you need to fill out all these forms, you need a visa, da-da-da-da. And meanwhile, you look out onto the street, and there's people just crossing back and forth on foot without anybody checking. So we did just that, and I hadn't seen Agave herderi in the wild, that's me in the upper left behind it. Another high elevation, 10,000 foot, huge agave, that is very similar to the atravirans in Oaxaca that I showed earlier. Bottom right is Agave mitis, which I think I have not shown a picture of yet, but I believe it occurs in just about every state in Mexico. You know, many years ago, I saw a talk on cycads from a woman from Colombia, and she was showing pictures of cycads that grew in relatively dry areas, and it kind of hit me that, dry areas of Colombia. I always thought of it as being a tropical rainforest type place. And I went down there with Kelly, who's in the upper left, to go just see what we could find. And we couldn't find a ton of information on the drier growing plants of Colombia, but the mountains go on for miles and miles, and there's surely other wonders down there. I will say, we saw about 3 or 4 different species of agave down there, and none of them were exactly thrilling. The one we did see it resembled a shorter, smaller form of an agave americana. But a beautiful, beautiful country, no doubt. And this bottom right was Ceiba barragona, and I believe it's now Cavanalacea. And that is a hat right in the middle of the trunk, so you can see it gets quite large. Beautiful tree. And if you're not tired of hearing me talk about different types of agaves, please come visit. This is my greenhouse right here. I have lots of beautiful different forms and shapes and species. These are the grounds. This is in North Escondido, not far, actually just a stone's throw from Oasis, if any of you have ever been to Oasis up there. And lots of different hybrids. It takes a long time to create a plant and grow it to see if it's good enough and name it. So I have lots of plants in the works up there, and these are just a few of them. But this is all mixing of the genes between the species. And as well, I have a lab on the property where I tissue these. So, and if you're not familiar with tissue culture, I imagine most of you are, but if you're not, if you were to take something like an agave, and I'll pretend that my hand here is an agave and the leaves are my fingers, okay? And the roots start down here, and those are my forearm. You would cut it just about to where the leaves start, and just about where the roots start, and clean that, and this is called a meristem. And that's what you're looking at in the test tube on the right. Well, actually on both these pictures, in the middle of the cutting board in the foreground, and then put in the test tubes, and it's starting to open. And it's pretty amazing that you can do this to a plant, and then treat it in a heavy percentage of bleach water, and then stick it under these grow lights, and it starts growing within a couple days. And so you continue to cut it back until you start to get plants growing out of each one of these little leaflets. I can't quite reach, but as you see it opening in the test tube, they start to come out of that area right there. And over time, now look at how many plants you have. And you can quarter this and then put each one of those into their own jar with their rooting hormone, and continue to do that as they grow and grow and continue to quarter. And it's probably the fastest way to clone any agave. And then you can name it something like, Agave Bob or whatever. And then when people go to the nursery, they know exactly what they're getting every time. It's a bit like, I don't mean to cheapen it when I say, it's a bit like going to McDonald's, and every time you know what your quarter pounder is going to taste like. They know exactly what they're getting, versus seed, where it's always going to be different. So that's it. And thus concludes the talk, actually. I do have a book for sale. If you would like to learn more about agaves, that goes far more in depth than I just did, I do have it available here. So
yeah, it's the second edition, too. Tell them about that.
Yeah, it's the second edition. It's greatly cleaned up. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to write a book, but it's amazing how many times you can read it and miss mistakes and reread it. But we've got just about everything cleaned up on this one. We've added new photos. We've got new species, updated species and whatnot. And
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Jeremy.